This is Dr. Albert Schweitzer. These are the people to whom he has devoted his life in Gabun, a province in French Equatorial Africa. Dr. Schweitzer runs a hospital for the people of Gabun. For the 40 years since he founded this hospital, he has been not only their doctor, caring for the sick and the injured, but their teacher, their builder, designing, planning, and working side by side with them to create a community for about 600 people. Their administrator, managing the daily affairs of what is not quite a native village nor a country town. And their minister, preaching to them a simple Christianity.
Il n'est plus sur terre, mais son esprit est resté sur terre. Il est dans ses paroles. Il s'adresse aux hommes et au peuple et leur dit, laissez-moi entrer dans votre cœur et y régner.
The story of Dr. Schweitzer's life ends here in Lambaréné on the Ogwe River, where his work has become an inspiration to people everywhere. But the beginning, and the world that he gave up for all this, is as important to the sum of his life as the end. It is 4,000 miles north as the crow flies. In France, the province of Alsace, the Münster Valley, the village of Gunsbach. This is where Albert Schweitzer grew up, and here too there are people who know him well. In a third-class compartment on a train rolling through the Münster Valley after a long journey across France, Dr. Schweitzer returns to Gunsbach. His work in Africa has made him world famous, but at the station he will be greeted by only a handful of friends. There will be no fanfare. To the local people, he is Monsieur Albert, one of their own. And like them, one who prefers to come and go quietly. Alone, he steps to the platform wearing an old-fashioned black suit and a hat 40 years old. He looks after his own luggage and helps load it on a cart. A train man asked him why he rode on the hard benches of a third-class compartment. Schweitzer's answer was that he rode third because there is no fourth class anymore. To the shy as well as to the bold, the doctor extends his hand until at last, with two members of his hospital staff who have arrived in Günzbach before him, he begins the 10-minute walk from the station through the village to his ivy-covered house. For most men, the scenes of their boyhood have been retouched by modern times. But the village where Dr. Schweitzer's roots are is not much changed in 80 years. While old men bask in the sun, passing the time of day, women still meet to do their laundry in a cold stream running beside a village street. When Albert Schweitzer goes by, they smile as to an old friend come home. His house, built in 1927, is very nearly the latest in Günzbach. It is like Sunday afternoon, with the village choral society there to sing for him. Mrs. Schweitzer gathers her grandchildren around her to listen to the serenade. She worked many years with her husband in Africa until ill health forced her to return to Europe. These children were baptized in Günzbach by their grandfather, but have never been to Africa, so he has missed their growing up. Over the world grapevine, the news goes out that Dr. Schweitzer is in Europe again. His secretary, Aimé Martin, sorts letters pouring in from everywhere. Invitations to lecture, requests for personal appearances, offers of assistance, cries for help. Each morning in his office, Dr. Schweitzer tends to his mail. These times in Günzbach are supposedly vacation periods, but he would not have made the long trip to Europe at all unless there was some work to do, some commitment to fulfill. Thus, even on a holiday, he is kept busy, but not too busy.
Nee. Alle? Ist er im Garten? In unserem Garten, ja. Und es bringt er... Nein. Was mache ich mit allem dann? Merci. Ist er im Garten? Ja, alles ist im Garten. Bonjour, bonjour, bonjour. Aber schön Wetter, gell? Ja. Der, wo Herbst hat, schön. Ja. Aber hast du schon Herbst? Noch nicht. Alle. Aber beliebt sie der für mich. Warte, ich bringe euch die Kerbelnüsse.
The village church is a few hundred yards from Dr. Schweitzer's front door. In it is one of the many organs in Europe that he has designed or rebuilt or rescued from destruction. As an organist, craftsman, and scholar, Schweitzer might easily have devoted his whole life to music. He chose the jungle hospital instead. But when he has time in Günzbach, it is his greatest joy to come to this place and play his beloved instrument. To Schweitzer, this is an ideal example of the village organ, an instrument perfectly proportioned to the size of the church. He plays Bach's prelude in D major. Like music, a man's life means more than the sum of its parts. It is a composition with many themes and one transcendent meaning. This is a fact of all life, and the life of Albert Schweitzer is not an exception, but an example.
I was born on 14th, 1875, at Kaysersberg in Oberelsass. Just 2 years before, at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, Alsace-Lorraine had been annexed to Germany by treaty. I was born in the house with the little tower at the left of the upper gateway of the town. Here, my father lived as pastor and teacher of the small Lutheran congregation, a minority in a predominantly Catholic community. When I was 6 months old, my father moved us to the parsonage in Günzbach in a neighboring valley. The road passes through places whose names are famous wine names. Gatzental, Ingersheim, Ammerschwier, Tirkheim. As a child, I was proud when told that the year of my birth was a great vintage year. The road turns into the Münster Valley at Tirkheim with its medieval gates. This beautiful valley runs high into the Vosges Mountains. It was the native district of my mother and her family, the Schillingers, a family of teachers, pastors, and organists. Günsbach is one of the smallest villages in the valley. Not more than 100 houses, clustered about the church like baby chicks around the mother hen. There are some Alsatian churches that hold services for both Protestants and Catholics. I liked the idea that in our village, everybody worshiped in the same church. And whenever I set foot in this place, I am filled with joy. This old photograph, taken in the 70s, shows my father's church looking much as it does today, except that now it has a new bell tower, which had to be repaired after it was damaged in the Second World War. The old parsonage still stands, and here my brother, my 3 sisters, and I passed our childhood. Our house was surrounded on all sides by other houses. It was damp and lacked sunlight. When we first came to Günsbach, I was a weak child, but the wholesome air of the valley did wonders for me. In my 2nd year, I improved and grew to be a sturdy boy. It was under this covered passageway that my father, one fine October day, put a slate under my arm and sent me off to school for the first time. I went, but I was weeping inconsolably, for I knew perfectly well that I was leaving my lovely, carefree childhood behind to enter the workaday world. This was my schoolroom. I was a quiet and dreamy child and learned to read and write with some difficulty. It was hard for me to keep my mind on my studies when my eyes were always wandering outside to the wonders of nature itself. I suffered deeply because the village boys did not accept me as one of themselves. To them, I was the pastor's son, one of the gentry, better off than they. My attempts not to be different from them in any way made no impression. They always made it clear to me that they considered me a stranger. Like all Alsatians at that time, we learned both German and French in school. Also at home, we spoke both languages. My older sister had a friend named Louisa. She asked me to write in her album, and as I was only 5, Louisa wanted to guide my hand. Indignantly, I refused, and with intense effort wrote, "Dear Louisa, do not forget your Albert Schweitzer." My first autograph is adorned with ink blots. When I was 8, my father, at my request, gave me a New Testament. One of the stories that interested me most was that of the wise men from the East. I could not understand why they never troubled themselves about the child Jesus after he grew up. What did Jesus' parents do with the gold and the treasure the wise men had brought? I wondered how they could have remained poor. It also seemed very strange to me that apparently none of the shepherds of Bethlehem ever became Jesus' disciples. At the age of 9, my life took a new turn. Every morning and evening, I walked nearly 2 miles over the hills to Münster, to the school where my parents had decided to send me. I was delighted to take these walks by myself, without any of the other boys, to think my own thoughts. How well I came to know the changing seasons. But the sheer youthful joy of being alive was something I never knew. I think this is true of many children who appear outwardly carefree and content. As far back as I can remember, I was shocked by the suffering that I observed in nature. Suffering brought about by the relentless struggle for existence. Still more shocking to me was the pain and misery inflicted on dumb, helpless animals by the negligence and thoughtlessness of men.
On earth as it is in heaven, give us this.
Even before I started to go to school, I couldn't understand why I was expected to pray only for human beings when I said my prayers at night.
But deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
So when my mother had drawn the shutters and blown out the candle and kissed me goodnight, I secretly said another prayer for all that had life, a prayer that I had made up myself. Dear God, protect and bless all living creatures. Keep them from evil and let them sleep in peace. An experience I had during these years made a lasting impression on me. A neighbor's son and I had made slingshots from rubber bands. One Sunday morning, he said to me, "Come on, let's go up the mountain and shoot birds." This seemed a horrible idea, but I didn't dare object for fear of being laughed at. The birds were singing sweetly in the morning sunshine, so unafraid of us. Crouching like an Indian, my friend put a stone in his slingshot and took aim. Obeying his look of command, I did the same with acute pangs of conscience. At that moment, the sound of church bells began to mingle with the sunshine and the birds' song. To me, it was a voice from heaven.
Shoot! Shoot! Shoot!
I frightened away the birds to protect them from my friend's shot and ran home. Ever since, when morning bells ring out in the sunshine, I gratefully remember those bells, for they rang into my heart the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." The manner in which this commandment against killing and cruelty worked upon me was the great experience of my childhood and youth. Gradually, I came to the unshakable conviction that we may bring death and pain to a fellow creature only under compulsion of absolute necessity, and that we must all feel the horror of causing suffering and death by thoughtlessness. I became more and more certain that all of us feel this way, but do not dare to affirm. We are afraid of being ridiculed as sentimental. We allow ourselves to become callous. Near Günzbach lies the city of Colmar, and there on the Champ de Mars stood a monument which was later destroyed in the Second World War. It was designed by Bartholdi, who created the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. Every time I passed through Colmar on my way home from school, I went to see it. On the base was the Herculean figure of a Negro with a pensive, melancholy expression on his face, which spoke to me of the misery of the dark continent. It was he who turned my youthful thoughts towards Flanders. When I was 18, we left the old damp parsonage and moved to a new one. This house opened on a sunny garden. We were then all in good health and lived in closest harmony together. The relationship between parents and children was ideal, thanks to the wise understanding with which our mother and father treated us, even in our follies. They educated us in the spirit of freedom. My father was my dearest friend. More and more, it became clear to me that I didn't have the right to take my happy family life, my health, and my strength for granted. One who escapes misfortune and has received much from life should render thanks by doing something to relieve the suffering in the world. I realized that all of us must feel the responsibility of mercy and carry our share of the world's burden of sorrow. This, added to the realization of suffering that had so shocked me in my childhood, led ultimately to the philosophy of life that was to be of decisive importance for me. When I was 21, even though I was still seeking some fundamental principle of morality and life, I did make a decision. I resolved to devote my life until the age of 30 to preaching, teaching, and music. I would then look for and follow a path of immediate service as a man to his fellow men. What that path was to be, I was confident circumstances would determine.
For the next 9 years, Albert Schweitzer worked to fulfill this promise he made to himself. These years were spent first in study in Strasbourg, where he received degrees in philosophy and theology, then in Berlin, where he came in contact with the leaders of the German intellectual life of the day, and in Paris, where he studied the organ with Charles-Marie Widor, the great teacher, composer, and organist. Then came years in which study was supplemented by intensive work in 4 fields: as organist, as writer, as university professor, and as preacher. At this time, he not only made a profound study of the organ as an instrument, but also pursued his research into the real nature of Bach's music. He chose to teach theology rather than philosophy, so that his teaching wouldn't interfere with his career as a preacher. Preaching, he said, was a necessity of his being. The titles of the books he published during this period of his life indicate the scope of his interests. The life of his teacher, Eugene Munch, books on Immanuel Kant, Johann Sebastian Bach, organs and organ building, St. Paul, and subjects related to the historical background of Jesus. Because of Schweitzer's unorthodox approach, these books on religious subjects were received with doubt by some and with open criticism by others. Underlying all these seemingly dissimilar subjects was a common element, what he himself called the everlasting struggle for truth. He worked hard with unbroken concentration during these decisive creative years. Denying time, he was accomplishing even more than he had originally set himself to do. But his 30th birthday was approaching, the day when he would turn, as he had promised himself, to the path of immediate service to his fellow men. The knowledge of the path he was seeking came to him suddenly one morning in the fall of 1904. A copy of the journal published by the Paris Missionary Society lay on his table. It was full of appeals for medical help in the jungles. Leprosy was prevalent. Sleeping sickness was spreading. One article in it was called "The Needs of the Congo Mission." It read, "Men who know how to say when the Master beckons, 'Lord, I go with you,' these are the men we need." His search was over. In Paris, one chilly October day in 1905, on the corner of the Avenue de la Grande Armée, Schweitzer put a half-dozen letters into a mailbox telling his family and closest friends of his decision. He would begin the study of medicine, preparing himself to go to Africa as a doctor. There was an immediate response, a chorus of disapproval.
What a strange idea.
Now, really, have you gone out of your mind?
Africa, of all places.
Isn't scholarship service?
Isn't teaching service?
But wait a minute, don't you go preaching?
Studying again for years to master a new subject for which you are not prepared and maybe not even suited.
Schweitzer remained adamant. From now on, the example of his life would be his sermon. He wanted to be a doctor so that he might be able to work without having to talk. 6 years later, at the age of 38, he received a degree in medicine. He wrote a letter to the Paris Missionary Society at the completion of his internship, saying he was convinced he could found a hospital in Africa. He had continued to earn money writing, preaching, and playing the organ. Now, with the help of a few friends, he could pay for the hospital himself. He had heard the Master's call. This was his answer. At this time, Schweitzer married Helena Breslau, the daughter of an historian who had been of great help to him in Strasbourg in the preparation of manuscripts. Ready to leave for Africa, they went to Gumsbach to say goodbye to his parents. Schweitzer saw his mother then for the last time. She was struck down and killed by cavalry horses on the road to a neighboring village during the First World War. On March 26, 1913, the Schweitzers went to Africa and founded the hospital at the Lambaréné station of the Paris Missionary Society. He did not go, he has said, to bring white civilization to the primitive land shown in these old photographs. Rather, in a sense, he went to atone for what white men had done in this land already. His first consulting room was a chicken coop. The hospital grew, even as war clouds gathered in Europe. On the evening of the day fighting began in Europe, the French authorities informed the Schweitzers that they, as German citizens, were automatically prisoners of war. All work stopped at the hospital. Schweitzer concentrated on a long new manuscript, his philosophy of civilization. Near the end of the war, new orders came for transfer to an internment camp in France. where he very nearly died from dysentery. By the terms of the armistice, Alsace became a part of France again, and the Schweitzers became French subjects. He went to Strasbourg, plagued by ill health. He was deeply in debt, and work was hard to find. Africa seemed very far away. On his 44th birthday, their daughter Reina was born. She was the one gay note at this low point of his life. Yet with encouragement from friends all over Europe, Schweitzer labored as never before, writing, lecturing, and giving concerts with a single ambition in mind. He wanted to save enough money so that he could start the jungle hospital all over again. He worked 5 years toward this end. Finally, in a storehouse in Strasbourg, he was able to gather the necessary supplies and prepare to sail again to Africa. Now 30 years and many voyages later, Dr. Schweitzer once again supervises the packing and loading of precious hard-earned drugs and equipment for his new African journey. To earn his supplies, he has written constantly, and when in Europe or America, he has lectured and played the organ. But he has not had to pay for it all himself. People in almost every country of the world have shown faith in the work he was doing, so the work has gone on. At Bordeaux, he embarks for Africa, bound for Lambaréné via Dakar and ports of call all along the coast of West Africa. By his 81st birthday, Dr. Schweitzer had lived and worked more than 40 years for his hospital in the jungle. In immediate service to his fellow man, he has spent 28 of those years in that tropical place, healing, building, and teaching by his example. From the Bay of Biscay, it is 3 weeks by sea to Port Gentil at the mouth of the Ogowe River, 1 degree below the equator. After 22 days at sea, Dr. Schweitzer changes to an Ogowe river boat for the 2-day trip upstream to Lambaréné. One can sleep or shut one's eyes and think back to another day like this, during the first time in Africa so many years ago, when there came to Schweitzer the 3 words that united the themes of his life and defined its meaning: reverence for life.
Slowly we crept upstream. Where I sit today, I sat then, lost in thought, struggling to find the elementary conception of goodness, which I had not discovered in any philosophy. I covered sheet after sheet of paper with disconnected sentences, merely to keep myself concentrated on the problem. Late on the third day, while passing these very same 3 islands, there flashed upon my mind, unforeseen and unsought, the phrase, reverence for life. The iron door had yielded. The path in the thicket had become visible. There had been 2 great commandments given to me through the experiences of my childhood and youth. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt love mercy. Through these, I had found my way to the idea of reverence for life, in which world and life affirmation and ethics were contained side by side. Here at the hospital, knowledge carries over into experience. What I believe is put into practice. My life bears its meaning in itself. That meaning is to be found in living out the highest and most worthy idea which my life can furnish, the idea of reverence for life. A day at the Lambaréné hospital begins. We have no need for clocks. Bells and tom-toms announce the time for each new activity as our day progresses. Reveille is sounded on 2 lengths of rail hanging near the door of the dining room. Our goats are let out of their night enclosure. The lepers are called for treatment. A bell summons all patients who are to receive medicine or have their dressings renewed. They assemble in front of the main building of the hospital. Each has an identification card showing name, case number, diagnosis, and date of admission to the hospital. We save our old shipping tags to make these identification cards. Everything at the hospital has an extra value. Nothing is thrown away. As they are called, the patients line up at the 2 entrances of the main building, which contains the consultation rooms, bandaging rooms, maternity ward, dispensary, and operating rooms. Those with minor ailments are cared for in the hospital street by native orderlies. This girl is from Holland. She is one of many who have come from all over the world to help me. In the pharmacy, we give out medicine and then a drink of water to wash it down. That way, one can be sure it has been swallowed. At my desk in the large room, I look over the cards of patients admitted during the last few days. Zizi, the cat, feels at home on my desk because here, as an orphan kitten, I gave her her milk. She is 20 years old. Large cards kept in the hospital file contain data on the nature, treatment, and course of the patient's condition. We have with us, usually, between 350 and 400 patients. More than 5,000 people each year come to be treated. The African native suffers from all of the ailments that are known to the outside world, plus many tropical diseases. We have to deal chiefly with malaria, leprosy, sleeping sickness, dysentery, skin diseases, ulcers, elephantiasis, pneumonia, heart disease, and strangulated hernia. These hernia cases usually reach us in an advanced stage. A child critically ill has been brought in to be examined. This poor little one, besides having leprosy, is suffering from a number of other diseases which it will take a long time to cure. New patients arrive at the hospital every day. Our three pelicans, Tristan, Parsifal, and Lohengrin, are always the first to give welcome. Our hospital is ideally situated. The sick people of Gabun come here from upstream and downstream on the Ogowe River and its tributaries. When someone falls ill in a native village, it is customary for the family to abandon the house, pick up all their belongings, and bring the patient to us. Word of mouth reports from former patients encourage people to come to the Lambaréné hospital. It has become known that we are ready to receive the family, no matter how large it is. We will house and feed them in a way that will make them feel at home. Usually, the accompanying members of the family remain in the hospital as long as the treatments last, cook for their sick, and look after them, and eventually take them home again. They bring with them cooking utensils and bedding. Whenever possible, I ask my patients for some tangible evidence of appreciation for the help they are receiving. Most of our patients by now know that the hospital is supported by outside donations. But I have always thought they would value the hospital more if they contributed to its maintenance themselves, according to their ability, than if they simply got everything for nothing. At the end of each month, roll call is held in the pharmacy. The patients show their identification tags with their names and numbers. This is the time to determine which of them may be discharged and remain for treatment. If we don't keep watch on them, our patients have a way of leaving whenever they feel like it, without giving us notice. The natives live here much as they do in their villages. In the general wards, there is no separation of men and women. Families remain together.
The beds are wide enough to accommodate 2 or 3 people, and high enough so that cooking utensils, food and water can be stored under them.
As there are neither cows nor milk goats in the jungle, an African mother must nurse her child until it is able to subsist on diet. The babies are often 3 years old before they are weaned. When there is no room on the beds, the healthy members of the family are supposed to sleep on the floor. But for novelty's sake, sometimes it does happen that the patient is persuaded to let them try the bed. So I have to look out. Well ones don't take the beds and leave the sick to shift for themselves on the ground.
Our regular morning visit through the wards brightens patients. It has been long for them, and they are always glad.
It is a special problem for a physician to treat disease under the conditions that present themselves in the jungle. He must be very patient with superstition and ignorance. He must understand the natives and discover how to adapt to native ideas the wisdom of his profession. He must dispense with most of the intricate modern appliances. This doesn't mean that the doctor should be unfamiliar with them. On the contrary, he must be so familiar with them that he knows how to do without them. He must practice a curious mixture of the old and the new. The latest drugs may be made available to him, but he will not be able, on the other hand, to count on a well-equipped laboratory. At Lambaréné, we do not have many delicate precision instruments. The reason for this is that they break down in the equatorial heat and humidity. I always prefer working on patients rather than on my instruments.
A woman suffering from lockjaw is recovering slowly. We have eased her pain. There is more than gratitude in her eyes. There is also a question. This is an experience I have had over and over. The patient will take my hand and say in wonder as well as relief, "I have no more pain." I tell him then that it was the Lord Jesus who sent the doctor to him, and the Lord Jesus who took the pain away. As midday approaches, the heat becomes oppressive. I find it best to pay no attention to it. That's why there are no weather thermometers at the hospital. If we knew how hot it was, maybe we wouldn't be able to stand it. Every day at noon, ration time is announced. All those patients who are not bedridden are called to come for their provisions. They assemble at our storehouse where a nurse checks off their names as they receive food, bananas, rice, manioc, and palm oil, according to the season. If we are not careful, some will go through the ration line again and again.
This is not dishonesty. The African Negro, the child of nature, is a casual man. He is casual about material things and casual about work. In return for very little of his labor, nature repays him with most of the necessities of life. Beyond that, if he takes what does not belong to him, it is not because he is a thief, but because he feels whatever is his. From morning until late at night, cooking pots are on the fires in front of the wards. The women of each family cook for their own. A native will not eat food prepared by someone outside the family. This is because of the poisonings that still occur if families who are feuding share a common kitchen. The nature of women. Sitting by her fire, a woman who cannot read is leafing through a fashion magazine that has somehow fallen into her hands. She is not convinced.
Our large garden extends along the river. In the rainy season, much of it is underwater. So much soil is carried away that after the floods, we have a big job replenishing what is left. Our best source of fertilizer is our goats.
Year after year, we have worked continuously to create a Garden of Eden around the hospital. We now have enough fruit trees growing here that all can take what they please, and there is no longer such a crime as stealing. Under the direction of a nurse, 2 cooks who have been with us for many years prepare lunch in the staff kitchen. The big old-fashioned brick cook stove, built by one of the nurses, has a good oven for baking bread. Every day, meals are prepared for about 25 people and often more.
Et nous voulons bien qu'il règne dans nos cœurs.
On my way to my room, I come upon a wounded chameleon, just in time to save him from Lisi. His injured tail will not prevent him from taking care of himself out of her reach. Every day at this time, able-bodied inhabitants of the community are called back to work. All too slowly, they assemble in front of my house. Hospital inmates who are expected to work include primarily the men and women who are here as companions of patients. We maintain them as well as the patients, and so I feel they should do their part.
Although these men know little about the Bible, they are fond of quoting one phrase from it. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. They say it is so hot they sweat whether they work or not, so why work?
After we distribute tools, more slowly than ever, our workers go off to their jobs. The riverboat arrives, bringing us a shipment of lumber from a sawmill downstream and other building material for the leper village. It's the signal for everyone who can to come to the Embarcadero to help in the unloading. We depend for everything that we don't make or grow at the hospital on these monthly visits of the regular Ogowe riverboat.
We have plenty of strong arms and backs at Lambaréné, but the problem of finding skilled workers has always concerned me. From time to time, I have been able to train patients to assist me in carpentry work, but usually as soon as they are well, they move on. Yet somehow the work gets done. You don't have to go far to be in the depths of the jungle. A narrow path leads from the hospital about 1/3 of a mile to the leper village, where building is in progress.
It's a big job, enlarging the site on the crest of a hill. And because of the storms, no trees can be left standing that might fall on buildings. With a heavy heart, I have to sacrifice a palm. Primitive methods are used to break up the heavy rocks on the site. The stone is heated with a brush fire. When cold water is thrown over it, it cracks from the force of rapid contraction and can easily be broken with a crowbar. With protective bandages on their legs, these patients break up the stones so badly needed for making concrete. We do not use the most modern methods in our work at Lambaréné. Modern equipment is expensive and shipping costs are high. Complicated machinery is difficult to maintain in this weather. Most importantly, I have not wanted to introduce these simple people to techniques and tools upon which they might learn to depend and which would be available to them when they return to their own communities.
During my life, I have had to devote much time to construction. 30 years ago, I built most of the hospital buildings as they stand today. For some years afterward, I was only incidentally concerned with construction work. But now I am at it again.
It has become necessary to build a new village for the lepers who have swarmed here in recent years. Since 1944, we have been treating our leprosy patients with new sulfur drugs, a great advance in the treatment of this terrible disease. There is now a possibility of curing leprosy. It may take from 1.5 to 2.5 years, and these people must stay with us for the length of the cure. We are, at present, treating more than 250 lepers. Up until now, they have been living in bamboo huts, which they built themselves.
These houses have now outlived their usefulness.
The new buildings rest on concrete foundations, 6 to 12 rooms in a row, each with its corresponding kitchen. The wood we build with is from the very hard okume tree. It is so hard that an auger is necessary to drill the holes where nails will be driven. It is the most common wood here, and it is impervious to the destructive termites. Once the framework of the walls is erected, a lattice of bamboo is prepared over which shingles of palm leaves are attached, then woven and bound on with raffia. When these walls, consisting of several layers of leaves, are protected from contact with the moist soil by a concrete foundation and from the rain by an iron roof, they last for years and are easy to replace when necessary. We have planned our buildings to provide lasting shelter at the lowest cost.
Now I am able to roof all my buildings with iron, thanks to the money I received for the Nobel Peace Prize.
As soon as the new quarters are finished, the lepers move in with all their belongings. How they enjoy their new homes. During the wet season, at least once a day, all outside work comes to a stop because of the tornadoes. With almost no warning, they overtake us.
On my way back to the hospital, I come upon a group of women cleaning out underbrush. I urge them to stop working. Everyone seeks shelter from the coming storm. I have learned by experience that these people are much more susceptible to colds than we are. They should not get wet, but still they take their time. brotherhood of those who bear the mark of pain. Who are the members of this brotherhood? Those who have learned by experience what physical pain and bodily anguish mean belong together all the world over. They are united by a secret bond. One and all, they know the horrors of suffering to which man can be exposed. And one and all, they know the longing to be free from pain. He who has been delivered from pain must not think he is now free again and at liberty to take up life just as it was before, entirely forgetful of the past. Now he is a man whose eyes are opened with regard to pain and anguish. And he must help others to overcome this pain and this anguish, as far as human power can overcome them, and bring to others the deliverance which he himself has received. One must be careful not to mix himself up uninvited in other people's business. On the other hand, one must not forget the danger lurking in the reserve which daily life forces on all of us. We cannot let ourselves get frozen into regarding everyone we do not know as an absolute stranger. No man is ever completely a stranger to his fellow man. Man belongs to man. Man has claims on man. Our reserve is condemned to be broken down by the claims of the heart. And thus all of us get into a position where we must reach out and to one of our fellow men become ourselves a man.
A day at Lambaréné ends. Late in the evening, Dr. Schweitzer returns to his room. In it, there are a desk, some books, and his old piano. These are all he needs to carry on his work in philosophy, theology, and music. Work that may never be finished because there are claims on his heart.